On the night of March 8, 2014, 239 people checked in at Kuala Lumpur International Airport for a standard red-eye flight to Beijing. It was a routine departure, one of thousands that occur every day across the region. The aircraft was a Boeing 777. At the time, it was considered one of the safest planes in the sky, with a nearly spotless safety record that made mechanical failure an unlikely starting point for investigators. For 40 minutes, everything was normal. The pilots checked in with air traffic control at regular intervals as they approached the boundary where Malaysian jurisdiction ends and Vietnamese airspace begins. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah signed off with a final message, "Good night, Mass 370. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder was manually deactivated and the flight vanished from civilian radar. Civilian controllers were left looking at an empty screen. Without a transponder signal, the plane's altitude and precise position were lost, triggering an immediate and massive search in the South China Sea. But the search area yielded nothing. No wreckage, no fuel slicks, and no distress signals. This total absence of evidence gave rise to a decade of theories, leading us to ask if the data can actually prove what happened to those 239 people. To understand where the plane went, we look west of the original search area. While civilian radar lost it, military systems were still watching. Malaysian military radar recorded the plane executing a deliberate 180-degree turn. Instead of heading to Beijing, it flew back over the peninsula. The aircraft maintained a steady heading over the Strait of Malacca, eventually flying beyond the reach of all military tracking. This sequence of manual turns led to immediate speculation of a hijacking or a hostage situation. However, another set of data recorded during the flight's final hours indicates the plane was never steered toward a landing strip. The precision of these maneuvers points to human control in the cockpit, but that control directed the aircraft away from help and toward the most remote part of the Indian Ocean. Even with its transponder off, the plane's satellite data unit continued to send automatic, hourly electronic pings, or handshakes, to an Inmarsat satellite. By calculating the time delay of these pings, investigators mapped 7 arcs across the ocean. They proved the aircraft flew for over 7 hours into the southern Indian Ocean, reaching the 7th arc, where its fuel supply was mathematically exhausted. A 7-hour flight ending in a total loss of fuel creates a specific biological problem on board. Whether those on board were conscious during the final descent depends on the aircraft's pressurization state. The evidence of a long, straight flight path on autopilot has led many investigators to the hypothesis of hypoxia, a catastrophic lack of oxygen in the cabin. If the plane suffered a depressurization, the emergency masks would have deployed automatically, but they are only designed to provide oxygen for roughly 15 minutes. Without a descent to a lower altitude, those 15 minutes would have passed quickly. In this scenario, passengers and crew would have lost consciousness long before the fuel ran out, leaving the autopilot to fly an unresponsive aircraft. This theory often circles back to the pilot. A search of Captain Shah's home flight simulator revealed a deleted flight path into the southern Indian Ocean, though investigators noted this does not provide a definitive motive. This data suggests that for several hours, MH370 was a ghost flight, a plane flying under the control of its computer systems, while the people inside were unable to intervene. To confirm the satellite data, authorities began an underwater search, using autonomous vehicles to scan thousands of square miles of the seafloor. In 2015, a piece of a wing washed up on Reunion Island, thousands of miles from the search zone. It was a flaperon, covered in marine barnacles. Serial numbers inside the part confirmed it belonged to MH370. This was the first tangible evidence that the aircraft had indeed entered the water. Analysis showed that the flaperon was in a retracted position. If a pilot had been attempting a controlled water landing, this part would have been extended to slow the plane down. Instead, its position is consistent with a high-speed plunge. When the engines flamed out from lack of fuel, the autopilot would have disengaged. Gravity then took over, sending the aircraft into a rapid, spiraling dive into the ocean. The physical evidence leaves no room for survival. The high-speed impact on March 8, 2014, represents the definitive end of the flight, occurring at a moment when the cabin was likely already beyond help. For the families of the 239 people on board, the lack of a final resting place remains a source of profound grief. They are left to mourn without the closure of a recovery. New efforts are underway using WSPR, a radio wave analysis that tracks how aircraft disturb global signals. This technology may finally provide the coordinates needed to locate the wreckage. Finding MH370 is no longer about a rescue. It is a mission to recover the flight recorders, confirm the aircraft's final location, and provide a definitive account for the families who have waited years for an answer.